This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, PreSonus, API Audio, Isotope, Sound Porter Mastering, JZ Microphones, and Spectra 1964. And you're hearing my voice right now on the JZ BB29 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100 mic pre, C610 comp limiter, and Isotope RX and Ozone. So get ready to rock.
I think 2003 is when I ended up trying to mix completely in the box. It was very difficult. It's become much easier. I mean, the plugins have become much better. I mean, Pro Tools has gotten much better. Some of the newer routing, the new folder tracks is great. You know, I've got one mix template. I pull it up, import the stuff into it, delete whatever I don't need, and get rocking.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. I've got two words for you that will help you make your best record ever and not lose it. Storage and backup. You want fast drives for composing and recording and reliable drives for backup so you don't lose all your hard work when something goes wrong. That's why I chose OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G internal SSDs for my studio computer and Mercury Elite Pro external drives for archiving. Discover the best OWC drive options for your studio at macsales.com/rockstars. The Spectra 1964 STX100 mic pre provides unequaled headroom and linear output regardless of transient audio peaks, capturing critical details from your microphone. The 100 series amplifiers were used by Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, and the Record Plant on records by ZZ Top, Aerosmith, and John Lennon. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio at Spectra1964.com or call them at 801-797-0642. Studio One from PreSonus is the ideal DAW for your home studio, taking you from songwriting all the way through mixing and mastering with a full suite of virtual instruments, guitar amps, and plugins for creative inspiration. It's easy to use for the beginner, yet fully customizable for your high-speed workflow as you become an expert. Get started now with Studio One Artist and PreSonus Sphere for access to all software learning and creative collaboration at PreSonus, wherever sound takes you. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Marc Frigo, a mix engineer, recording engineer, and producer based out of Nashville, Tennessee, with multi-platinum credits and over 29 years of experience. Marc started out in his hometown of Chicago in '90, but relocated to Nashville, Tennessee in early '91, where he became a staff engineer at Woodland Studios, which is actually where he and I met. It was there that he was able to work with and learn from some of the best engineers and producers in the world, such as Peter Collins, Don Was, T-Bone Burnett, Tony Brown, Josh Leo, Jay Joyce, and engineers like David Leonard, Steve Marcantonio, Rick Will, Bob Bullock, Steve Tillisch, Bill Schnee, and so many others that were great mentors. During his days as an assistant engineer, he worked on projects with Bob Seger, Keith Urban, Restless Heart, Tammy Wynette, George Jones, the Divinyls, Nancy Griffith, Larry Carlton, Gillian Welch, and a long list of credits. Eventually moving out of assisting and into engineering, Marc worked on projects for the Indigo Girls, Katie Olson, Nelson, Des Dickerson of Prince and the Revolution, Israel Houghton, Jewel, and future leaders of the world, to name just a few. Marc also recorded and mixed the Larry Boy theme song featuring Nicole C. Mullen for the popular VeggieTales children's video series, which went on to sell 15 million copies. Not bad. Marc and I met when I was interning at Woodland Studios a few years after you started there, I think. So I think I interned in 94, and I guess you started there about 91, 92, something like that?
Yeah, 91 is when I moved here and started at Woodland. Yeah.
Okay, cool, man. Well, so, dude, I'm glad to have you here. I'm psyched to be reconnecting after 25 years later. Please welcome Marc Frigo to Recording Studio Rockstars. Marc, are you ready to rock, dude?
Let's do it, man.
Come on, man. You were supposed to say, I'm ready to chill, man.
I'm ready to rock.
So it's really cool hanging with you, dude. I think we crossed paths once, maybe twice, like actually in person in the last few years or something, somewhere, right?
I did. Well, I came by your place when I first moved back to town. Maybe it was the first year, like 2013, the first year I was back in town. And then we saw each other at a party at Dark Horse. I remember running into you out there. Bonfire party. Yeah.
Bonfire.
Yeah.
Not so many of those going on right now. Rockstars, just to date this, of course, I usually do these interviews and then they come out later. But you're going to be listening to this and hearing us back in the time of quarantine.
Yes.
Just maybe unwinding from quarantine. I don't know. But anyway, dude, it's great to hang with you. And it is a trip to think about the fact that this is like 25 plus years later from the time that we met. And I'm looking at your photo on Skype, and like me, you have sort of a buzz cut, but I think we both had long hair at the time when we were at Woodland, right?
Yeah, we did. I think we both had long, straight hair. You know, that was my thing for about 15 years. I didn't cut my hair short.
The dream of the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were we rocking flannels at the same time? I can't remember.
I don't think that I wore flannels much. I don't remember. I had some, but more like just in the winter when I was working on the car or something, I think.
Yeah. I don't think the climb is quite right here. The climate. That's short for climate.
Nah.
A little too warm in Nashville for flannels.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that's why did the 90s thing, the grunge thing didn't really take off in Nashville. I mean, it came from up north anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to all that stuff during that time, but yeah, it didn't seem as big here for sure,
Well, we were starting to kind of create our own things, but, really, I should just be asking you what was going on, because when we were at Woodland, you were assisting on records, you and Amy and Sandy, and help me out if there were other assistants that I'm forgetting to give a shout out to.
Chris Stone was probably there at that time, right?
Yeah. Chris
was there.
Yeah, he was cool.
Yeah, he's gone on to do some pretty great things. If you haven't interviewed him, you should give him a ring.
No, I need to reach out to him. I remember being like, and Chris, you might find this entertaining, hopefully, but I remember being a little bit jealous of Chris because I think he was a new young guy like I was, whereas the rest of you had been there for a few years in assisting. And when I accepted the internship that was offered to me was a technical internship. So I was learning how to build cables and stuff under John McGriff when I was there. But I really secretly just wanted, not even that secretly. I was like, I really just want to be in the studio making records. So I saw you guys doing it.
I remember that. Yeah. I knew you wanted to be in the studio, and I didn't blame you. That's where I wanted to be.
I know. But, looking back on it, though, of course, it all worked out just fine. I totally got to meet so many amazing people there, and I got to see so many cool things happening, and how incredible it was that Bob Solomon, who owned the studio, gave me the opportunity as an intern. I mean, I had a key almost immediately. I could let myself in and go into the studio, and go use some of the stuff on a weekend if it was downtime, and record my friend playing in his band, just to learn stuff. But enough of me talking. Tell us a little bit more about you and how you, give us a brief intro into how you got started out, and how did you where'd you start and get to Woodland sort of quickly?
Yeah. Well, so my history growing up was that I just loved music, and I had friends in bands, and I didn't really play or anything, but I always loved stereos and tape recorders and gadgets. I'd gone to college and I was taking radio broadcasting, taking some recording on the side, but I just got drawn in. I wanted to be part of making the music, I decided, rather than like playing the music and talking about the music on the radio. And so I just got sucked into recording. I ended up going to Full Sail. After that, I went back to Chicago, where I'm from, did an internship, was going to go out to LA because I'm a rocker. But I had some friends that moved here, and they said, come down for a visit before you move. So I came down for a visit in late 90, just before Thanksgiving. And I fell in love with the town. I mean, everybody was so friendly, and I thought there is no way in LA that I'm going to get to go into all these major studios and just hang and talk to people and have these doors open to me, you know? And I kind of learned that there was a lot more going on here in Nashville, even beyond the country music, you know, because I really didn't know anything about country music.
Yeah,
but I ended up moving here. Yeah, I ended up moving here early in 91 and worked on my share of country, but also got involved with a lot of the guys doing some of the rock and the pop stuff. So that was really cool.
Yeah, well, you work with Jay Joyce, right?
Yeah, Jay, on a bunch of projects in the 90s, you know, and used to go see his rock band Iodine would play out. You know, it was Jay and Brad Pemberton and Chris Feinstein and, you know, those guys. So.
And Rick Will, he was doing a bunch of rock stuff too, right?
Yeah, Rick was doing some rock stuff. I remember we worked on like a Heather Nova project together. And I mean, and he was working with Jay's band with Iodine some
right.
when they needed to cut tracks. And he had a band called Vajantis.
That's right.
you know, with Jonathan Bright, who's really an amazing artist in his own right. But anyway, yeah. So all these guys, and I think they were all like Belmont guys that had come up together. I don't know if Jay Belmont. I can't quite remember. But anyway, you know, I think a bunch of them were Belmont guys that had kind of come up together and just kind of had this kind of thing going. So it was fun.
Tell us a little bit about Woodland. You know, how would you describe what Woodland was? I mean, we had 2 studios there, and I was lucky to kind of help build out the 3rd room.
Yeah. Yeah. So Woodland, when I started there, I moved here, you know, in early 90 and ended up, I was at SIR and I was a cartage guy, and I went around and delivered the gear for the session players to all the studios. And I kept finding all the cool studios. And then during the day, I worked a night shift. I would go to all these studios and drop off my resume. And my wife, Amy, was already working at Woodland. She's the first person I met there when I was delivering some gear. And I handed her my resume. She's the one who called me in for the interview. And I went in and talked to Bob and Dave. And at the time that I started there, Studio B was open. And Richard Dodd was in there a good bit. And I remember he was working with Jeff Lynne from ELO when I first started there. Studio A wasn't even reopened yet. It was a mess. That was part of my job, was to clean that out. So the big 9-foot Baldwin, the one that had been one of 2 made for Liberace, that's one we had there. Yeah. And so that one was just covered in stuff. You know, it had a cover over it, but there's like old paint cans piled on top of it and stuff. The old compression ceiling was still in the control room in A. So that's part of what we did. None of those booths, those newer booths that were in the back of the room where the piano went and the 2 smaller booths back there, those weren't there. So that was all put in, and Amy and I helped tear out that compression ceiling, put some insulation in these booths, do whatever they needed us to do. So
what is a compression ceiling for the rock stars?
The compression ceiling is the ceiling that, like, it comes down at angles from the front of the room towards the mix position. And it was something that they did back in, I guess this was a 60s thing.
Wasn't it it's like a Tom 60s, Hidley maybe thing, 70s. Or did he just do a bunch of those?
I don't know if it was Hidley's design. I don't know who came up with it. But it was supposedly a way of directing the sound, I guess, to the mixed position. But it was something that just kind of faded out. Nobody really wanted it. So we ripped all that out. And so, yeah, part of our job was getting this studio together. And then we hoped and prayed that once the studio was together, there'd be enough, you know, bookings to keep us busy in the studio. And that's exactly what happened. By early 92, we were doing our first bookings, and it just ended up being nonstop. You know, I remember Restless Heart was one of the first big artists I worked with. Amy was working with Patty Loveless. I think every record made by Patty in the 90s, Amy was part of, you know, and it was just insane. It was nonstop. And Bob Seger came in, and the Indigo Girls, and Faith Hill on her first record, and John Fogerty was another artist I got to work with. The Divinyls, with Peter Collins, and then goodness gracious, Nancy Griffith. And
yeah, I remember meeting Bob Seger on he put a treadmill in Studio A so he could get his exercise while you guys were making the records. And I was like,
yeah,
hey, man, nice to meet you.
He did. He had his treadmill, and then he'd get off and smoke a cigarette, and
keep on rocking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, all right. So let's talk about Studio A and Studio B a little bit and keep laying it out there, because we're all geeks and we love to hear about all the details.
Yeah.
Studio B had an incredible console in there.
Yeah. B had the Neve VR. There was a V3.
No, wasn't that A? Didn't A have?
No, maybe.
Or am I mixing up which is A and B?
A is the track. A was the big live track.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I had it
So A, yeah, if you want to talk A, yes, it had the Neve 8068 that had come out of Frank Zappa's remote truck.
That's so badass.
And I mean, any 8068 is probably going to have some cool history, right? Because they were boards that only people with money could afford.
Right.
And, but man, still one of my favorite consoles to cut on of all time. And, part of it's probably because I'm partial to it. That's how I came up. I learned on that board from some of the best engineers in the world,
Yeah.
I'm in there assisting, Steve Marcantonio and David Leonard and Ed Cherney. And I mean, it was just nuts. Bill Schnee, these guys. So they all knew this board. And even a moment, Al Schmidt was in there for something. And just kind of, I remember being in the room. I don't know if I was actually assisting on that session, but I remember being in the room and just being in the back, being silent, kind of watching Al do his thing, which is something to behold,
Yeah, I bet.
So those moments, you can't put a price on them. I mean, you're learning from some of the people who are the best in the world at this.
Well, so we're definitely going to dig into that, but let's keep going on the studio a little bit. So then Studio A was the Neve VR room.
Studio B, yeah.
B, excuse me.
VR,
B,
yeah.
Thank you. I'll get it straight one of these days.
Yeah.
But Studio B was the Neve VR room, and it was like, how many inputs was it? It was a ton.
It was a 72. When I first started there was a V3 and it was a 60. A VR 60.
Right, that's right.
When I first started there was a V3 in there that was a 48 input. But I think even within my first year there, they swapped that with the VR, and so that was mainly used for mixing. But people would cut tracks in there too, and that room was big enough you could cut a full orchestra in that room as well. They're both really huge studios.
Beautiful looking room.
Yeah, it was an old movie theater, so it was huge, And
it was like the control room was kind of built up onto where the stage of the screen of the movie theater would have been, right?
I think you're right about that. I don't know for sure, but that was always kind of my take on it, Yeah. And the old balcony, if you went up there, that's where we had the old EMT plates. Do you remember ever having to go up there to change reverb time on the plates?
I don't think I was ever asked to change the reverb time, but I did go up and I saw it, and you're up on this balcony and you're looking down and on the tops of the studios.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, and we had 20-some foot ceilings. And so it was just, it was a wonderful, wonderful place to work and learn. And there was already a rich history of hit records being made there. And then, to get to be part of adding to that legacy, because the records that we made there, now some of those are just huge historic albums.
Yeah.
It's really
Tell me
just
about
a cool thing to think back on.
So then there was a long hallway that sort of took you from studio to studio. And then on the far end was where Studio C went in. And that's what I had a hand in doing some of the wiring and building patch bays and stuff, which is really cool.
That vintage API that Steve Durr and Steve Hennig owned the equipment that was in that room. And that was Carole King's piano that was in that room. So,
oh, wow.
Interesting.
And wasn't that like Elvis's old API or something like that?
You know what? I don't know. I could ask Steve Hennig or Steve Durr. I still talk to both of those guys on occasion. So,
well, Steve Durr has been on the show recently, and he was
cool.
great. He's awesome. Just so full of stories and hilarious, like deadpan jokes that like you pause for a second and you realize that you just got, he just told a joke on you. Do you want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on my voice. If you want great consistent mixes too, go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get an additional 10% off. Have you ever struggled to finish a mix wondering if it was truly ready for mastering? Wouldn't it be great to have a trusted coach walk you through the final stages of mixing so that you could confidently deliver your mix for professional mastering, knowing that it was just right? At soundporter.com, home of the iterative mastering process, Brian Murphy is your trusted coach to listen to your needs and help you get your mix ready for mastering. Contact Brian now for a free mix review and mastering demo at soundporter.com. So very cool stuff, man. I was really just, in awe of all of it. I was the young kid in there.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know what was going on. And one of the things that was very cool about my position as an intern, where I was answering phones and building cables, I learned everything I know about like building cables and wiring stuff. I learned from John over there in the internship, which was incredibly valuable and helped me get my next job. But B, it's like when you're hanging out in the lobby, guess who actually has time to talk to people and meet people? It's whoever's hanging out in the lobby when they come out and take a break, all the artists and stuff like that.
Yeah, the artists, the producers, you just run into people, and I think we had talked about Emmylou Harris's album being done there, the Wrecking Ball album. And I remember I wasn't on the session. Sandy was on that, but I remember sitting in the lobby and talking to Daniel Lanois and Emmylou in the lobby during the making of that record. It was just cool.
Yeah. Well, I probably will talk about that one because that happened during my time, which wasn't super long, so it took up a big chunk of it. But I've got some great stories from the making of that record. But, when they came in, I remember that Daniel had his assistant come down, who I apologize, I forgot his name, but he brought down a U-Haul truck from Canada, and it was like full of tapestries and oriental rugs and equipment and guitars and amps and all this cool stuff. And his job for a few days before Daniel even arrived was just like outfitting the studio with this whole vibe and making sure all the gear was there and everything was available for recording. Do you remember that process at all?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think I was either involved in another project or maybe I had a day off or something. But I remember working in B on some other stuff while they were setting up for that. But I do remember a bit of that going on. And I remember going into the studio during the session, not while things were happening, but like during a break or whatever, and just seeing the setup and thinking, oh my goodness, this is insane. Yeah. All the gear and instruments they had set up in A, just as much as possible they wanted to have ready to go, so that at a moment's notice, Daniel could walk to any instrument and start playing, and Sandy or whoever would have to make sure that that instrument was patched in and ready to record,
That's awesome. Trial by fire right there.
Yeah. It was intense for her. I remember her talking about that, saying, yeah, he wants everything ready to go. And I've only got, how many inputs we had 32 plus another 12. So 44 inputs in that room, and I think, what they had set up out there was more than that. So she would have to repatch things if you wanted to go to another instrument that wasn't patched in, You
got to be fast.
Yeah.
I guess now we take a lot of that for granted, or, maybe you just have enough inputs into a Pro Tools thing that stuff's already ready to go and you don't have to think about it so hard.
Yeah. And I mean, 44 was a lot, right? I mean, most times like that's plenty. Now we're like, and we would do things on 24 track or 48. Maybe we'd sync 2 analog machines or have a Sony 48 machine, at whatever point. But now I get stuff to mix. I get 120, 130, 150 tracks, and sometimes it's superfluous. Sometimes, you think, well, it could have been, there could have been a lot of sub-mixing in advance, which is how we handled a lot of it back then, right? I mean, if you really needed layers and layers of harmonies, you were going to layer them and you were just going to commit to a stereo track of those harmonies.
Totally, bounce it down. And I mean, if you're on analog, it was expensive if you wanted to keep them around to remix it later.
Yeah.
I mean, in my world, I transitioned from Woodland over to Alex the Great, where it was all ADAT based. So in ADAT world, it was totally doable to hold on to those, the original tracks and then do a bounce, but then go back to the tape again if you wanted to. You could have multiple tapes running at the same time.
Right. The ADATs, and as much as ADATs, it's definitely a love-hate thing. You had some options that you didn't in other places, but you're like, they didn't sync up again. That whole thing, and just yeah. But you're
talking about syncing up multi-track tape machines. I actually didn't do that until probably 2005.
Yeah.
That's when I finally was working with the band that really wanted to, they wanted to go back to that analog stuff. And otherwise we were all in Pro Tools. And so I had to learn how to sync up time, links, synchronizers, and multiple tape machines. And it was fascinating. It was hard to do, but it was a pretty rewarding puzzle when you got it to work.
And if you did it a lot, you would know it. But for me, it wasn't something I did a ton. So fortunately, the guys like Paul and Mike Simmons, they were my saviors, because they would work for Underground or Dream Hire or wherever we would be renting the sync box from. And a lot of times it was the old Zeta 3s, which I think were even harder than the Lynx. And inevitably, I'd forget some setting somewhere, and I'd be on the phone, and they just show up and go, yeah, let me go through it. Oh yeah, here you go, got it. And they'd set you up and they'd save the day, when the session's starting in 5 minutes.
Yeah, they're like, well, all you need to do is triple hold these 3 buttons and then turn the power on and off 5 times in the back and then count to 7, and it's fine,
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah,
well, that's cool, man. So the hallway in Woodland, as I recall, there were all these posters, gold records and stuff. Do you have any sort of iconic memories of some of the records that were on the walls there, or anything that you thought always thought was hilarious or
the first time I walked in to Woodland, this was like I said, I was at SIR, I was delivering some gear. I walked in the front door, because we just load in right through the front. We drop the ramp on the front door and roll the gear right in through the front doors there. And in the lobby, I walked in and I looked on the wall and I saw the Kansas Point of No Return triple platinum album hanging on the wall there. And to me, that was this interesting sign, because that is the first vinyl album I remember purchasing for myself. I'd had albums that I'd gotten for Christmas or given to me or whatever. My dad had a pretty good collection and he gave some to my brother and myself. But that was the first album I ever remember purchasing for myself. So seeing that one hanging on the wall and thinking, wow, that album was done here. Now, it turns out not all of it was done there, but some of it was done there, the strings for Dust in the Wind were cut in B, not A, the main tracking room, but in B, apparently.
Wow.
And, a lot of it was done at Studio in the Country in Bogalusa, but for some reason, I don't know why, some of it was done at Woodland. And so that was just a cool one for me. But then there was Slim Whitman hanging in the hallway, right? Who I really didn't know much about Slim Whitman, but I remember that one hanging in the hallway. And
the Oak Ridge Boys. I think the Oak Ridge Boys was a big one. Yeah, sure,
Oak Ridge Boys. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember them all anymore. But
and then wasn't there? Didn't Bob have an Extreme or something like that was up on the wall? The band.
Oh, probably, yeah. And that was. I mean, he worked with Nuno and those guys up in Boston. Back in his time there. So yeah, I'm sure Bob had something. Maybe that was in his office. I don't remember now, but yeah.
That's a trip, man.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the lobby. So here we go. I'm going to share one of my stories.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so this is one of the things that you do get to do if you're an intern out in the lobby, as opposed to being in the studio. If I was in the studio, I would have been worried about, keeping quiet and making sure things were plugged in before they were needed, I guess, even though I didn't understand that stuff yet. But in the lobby, the trucks, the cartage trucks would pull right up, and they'd back up to the front entrance. And you have to picture, rock stars, a glass front with glass double doors, like a movie theater, like an old school movie theater. You just open the double swinging doors to come on into the theater lobby. So the truck would back up to that, and then they'd open up the double doors, and then the ramp would just kind of come into the lobby, and they'd just be able to load and unload stuff into the studio that way. Well, Emmylou Harris and Daniel Lanois were in, I guess, with Sandy in Studio A, and they're doing that record. And Emmy had a dog. She had a big, oversized black poodle that she would bring to the studio.
Bonaparte.
There you go.
That was the dog's name, yes.
There's you have no idea how relevant that is to the story. So the day starts, and I come in, it's like messages. This is Emmylou's dog. Make sure, whatever you do, make sure that the dog doesn't get out the front doors of the studio.
Oh, no.
So meanwhile, in the middle of the day, the cartage truck comes and they just throw the doors wide open, and they're loading stuff in and out. Well, sure enough, that dog just sees those doors open, sees a tiny opening, and just bolts for it. And I was like, oh shit. I'm at the front running the phones, and the dog just went right out the front door. So, Woodland opens up onto a big ass parking lot, and then on every side is a major street. And Gallatin Road is the biggest thoroughfare street coming through East Nashville. And sure enough, Bonaparte just goes like galloping across the parking lot straight for Gallatin Road. And I was like, oh shit. So I'm out there, running after this dog with my ponytail and my, I don't know what, I'm probably wearing the same damn clothes I'm wearing today, but run across the parking lot. And then the dog doesn't even stop. It doesn't even pause. It just goes straight across Gallatin Road, midday traffic. And I just swallowed my heart, and I'm running after the dog. And at that point, on the other side of the main street was kind of, kind of shabby houses and overgrown lawns and stuff. And so the dog goes into this area, and I'm going back there, and I'm trying to get it, and this dog's not going to let me catch it, But it finally stopped. It paused to take a crap in somebody's lawn, and I had to run up and tackle the dog mid-crap. to get a hold of him, and then walk Bonaparte all the way back over to the studio, and then bring him in and not tell anybody. So now I've told everybody.
Oh my good. Yeah, I never knew that. So you haven't told anybody? This is the coming out of this story?
Yeah, just my closest of friends.
Right.
Maybe I mentioned it on the podcast somewhere. I don't know. I've done a lot of interviews at this point.
Right.
But I like to give myself a little bit of credit and say that, the wrecking ball, the unwritten credit on there is that Lidge saved the day by rescuing Emmylou's dog.
That's awesome.
From certain, death as across the street. Because I'm sure if that dog had not survived and I had not gotten it back, that would have been quite a thorn in the side of the making of that record.
Yeah. And nobody to this day would know who Lidge Shaw is, and there would be no recording studio rock stars. Or
I'd just be one of those stories where they're like, well, there was this one intern, and he let the dog out, and boy, he was gone the next day. We never saw him again.
Forget his name. He's a nice guy.
Yeah, but you're mentioning the dog's name is Bonaparte, and that just made me think about like bones coming apart across the road. I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So that's it. Thanks for bearing with my story there.
That's great.
API Audio has been designing mic pre's, compressors, and EQs for more than 50 years. Every product they make includes founder Saul Walker's original proprietary op amps and transformer designs to make sure you always get that legendary API sound in your studio. Whether you are writing songs for fun or mixing Grammy-winning hits, API has got you covered with individual modules, rack units, and dedicated consoles to make sure your next record is your very best. Go to APIaudio.com. Sometimes you just need a mic that will stand out in a mix. That's when you need the new BB29 Signature Series from JZ Microphones. The unique single diaphragm golden drop capsule gives the BB29 airy highs and smooth mid-range to help your tracks stand at the front of your mix. JZ's handcrafted, fully discreet microphones come with a 5-year warranty and free shipping to the US. You're hearing my voice on the BB29 right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the BB29 at jzmic.com. What about you, man? What's a ridiculous story from the studio that comes to mind? Anything pop into your head?
I wish I could think of something.
How about something where you're like, oh man, I'm so embarrassed that I just did that and I won't do that again?
Oh man, there's gotta be things, but it's so long ago and my mind is like, I know there was stuff that I always remember the stuff that I was great at, you know,
right,
like
well, let's go there.
It, right? Oh gosh. Yeah.
Let's go to the stuff you were great at. Let's pick one of the names on the list and just start there. So Peter Collins, super nice guy. Another dumb anecdote. I met him and then later around town, I saw him on a gas station one day and I pulled up and I was like, he was pumping gas and I was pulling in. I was like, Peter, hey. And I was trying to say hi to him. And he saw me and he's very nicely like left his car pumping gas, walked all the way across the parking lot to come say hi and shake my hand. And I was, again, super embarrassed. I was like, I couldn't get my seatbelt undone to be the first one out of the car to walk over to him, you know?
Yeah. No, that's...
All right. Dumb stories. All right. So tell us about Peter Collins. Who is he? What were some of the records that are important that you're aware of, and what did you learn from him?
So Peter, you know, I mean, I think that when I first worked with him, this is the first session I worked with him was the Swampophilia, the Indigo Girls Swampophilia record, and this would have been, I think that record came out in 94, so I'm thinking it was 93 that we were working on this, fall of 93 into winter of 93, And so I don't know that I knew who he was prior to working with him. And that's when I met David Leonard too, one of my, you know, who's become one of my biggest mentors as well. David was the engineer on the record. Peter was producing. And, you know, later I find out, okay, Peter is the guy who did, you know, like Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime and Empire and these records and a bunch of the Rush albums, you know. And he's, I don't know if he'd worked with Bon Jovi prior, but at least at some point, maybe it was after that. And so I'm learning all this as I'm working with Peter and David. You know, I know they'd done the prior Indigo Girls record. I think Rites of Passage was the prior record to Swampophilia. They'd already worked together. And so I'm meeting them and Peter, you know, again, like you said, just a really nice guy. He knows how to make a record, you know, and we had the budgets to try things and experiment back then, which was a really neat part of it. You know, like, oh, just play around and see if you find a cool bass part, you know, and like, might be like an hour or two of doing that to find a cool bass part. And I remember that like specifically for the song Power of Two that's on, I think that's Swampophilia. That particular record, it was Sarah Lee on bass on that project, and I remember him just having her play around and going, "Oh no, I like this part. Let's play off this here." You know, that was really nice right there. The last few measures you played, and so we just kept going around and around and back and forth, and finally came up with this cool bass line that was, you know, it's very melodic, and it very much is a part of driving that track. You know, which is why I think we spent a lot of time on it. So Peter, I always wanted to work with him like on one of the Rush albums, and I picking his brain about the Operation Mindcrime album, and working with Queensryche. So this is Peter, and then David, his mentor was Humberto Gatica. So he came up, working with Humberto like on Tina Turner records, and then David working on, the Toto 4 album is David, and then a lot of the Prince stuff in the 80s is David. So getting to, work with these guys and kind of pick their brains when you have time about some of these other iconic records that they'd been a part of that, maybe you grew up on or whatever, was always fascinating.
Yeah. And what I really enjoy about this podcast is just seeing how small a world it is. Like the connections they're so close, It's like you start digging in, you realize, oh, this person worked with, and they knew them, and then they were working on that record, and it's all connected.
Here's a story I was thinking that I don't know about. It kind of is embarrassing. It was the first session in Studio A after we got it set up and ready to go. So I'm booked to be the assistant. This is probably early '92, and I'm nervous because all I've done up until this point at Woodland is I am the cleaning guy, right? I'm cleaning the bathrooms. I'm cleaning out the studio. I'm helping with construction, whatever. I have not actually assisted officially on a session yet. And it's Gene Eichelberger is the engineer. Do you remember Gene at all?
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, Gene he was a really cool guy. And I had already worked with him a little bit because he let me hang out at Burnett House and learn there. Like at some point over the summer of '91, I remember hanging out at the Burnett House, and Gene was kind of, I don't know if he was a staff engineer there, but he was like a guy who worked there all the time. And he let me hang out, but he was kind of gruff and he could be kind of tough. But if you get to know him, you realize, okay, he's really a nice guy, and you had to really know that. So fortunately, I knew this about him, right? And so here I am getting ready to do the first session in studio. It's the day before. I'm trying to get set up, and they're still wiring the mic panels. McGriff's in there, and Dave Klein and whoever. They're still wiring things up, and I'm kind of sweating because I'm like, man, I want things to be perfect. This is Gene Eichelberger, and I just want this to be perfect. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go home and get some sleep. I'll come back in early and finish the setup. So I get there at like, I don't know, it's like 6 or 7 in the morning, and they are still working on wiring panels and getting things in order. And so now I'm kind of freaking out, and I haven't even had time to learn the 8068. I knew consoles like the VR, and you could push a button and make the signal go anywhere. Well, on the 8068, there was a lot more patching that had to be done. There were some limitations to the console I didn't know about. For instance, AUX 1 through 4 were all in the input path. They were not in the monitor path. I didn't know this.
Right.
I had no, so I'm patching in reverbs off the input path. And I don't know, for the most part, it's working as we're cutting tracks because we're using it in line. Everything's kind of bussed straight to where it's going. So the reverbs are coming up where they're supposed to. But of course, on playback, all that goes away.
Oh, right. There's no reverb.
Yeah. And so the session went horribly just because, the studio wasn't ready to go. I didn't really have time to learn the room, and just a lot of things went wrong. But fortunately, they loved me. The Gene was very thankful that, he knew it was beyond my control, that I couldn't have possibly known certain things, didn't have time to learn it. So I think what ended up happening is Bob and Dave gave the studio time for free, and they paid me like $250 cash, which is more than I would have made that day, right?
Nice.
They were just so thankful because they didn't get as much as they should have that day, but they got some usable things. So they felt like, hey, let's give Mark some money because, man, we put him through the ringer. We know it wasn't his fault that the studio wasn't quite ready to go. But after that, that was, like this litmus test, and then worked out all the kinks. And before you knew it, like I said, it was just nonstop booking. But that was this crazy, stressful. I was wiped out, man.
Yeah, no, those are so valuable too, because they, you never forget, and that's the thing that motivates you to get it right on another session, because you don't want to repeat that stressful situation,
Yeah. And then later, we did mods to the console, where, that was a quad console and we didn't use it in quad. So I think it was the right rear button. You push that and it would put AUX 1 through 4 in the monitor path. Because why do we need AUXs in the input path anyway? We really didn't. We really needed them in the monitor path. So anyway.
Well, that's interesting. So it was a quad console and you didn't use the rear left and right.
Yeah.
But what's funny is, I've now learning different mixing tricks. Like you'd hear about Andrew Sheps talking about the rear bus compression trick.
Right.
Where they would actually use that rear bus as part of this whole parallel compression. And how often, now I do remember learning parallel compression. Bob Solomon sat me down one day in Studio B at the VR console when I was messing around with something, or maybe he was doing something, and he showed me parallel compression on some drums, and I was like, holy shit, man, that sounds amazing.
That's the coolest thing. Yeah.
It just
I remember
massive.
learning that. Yeah, I remember learning. Steve Marcantonio is the first one who showed me that, patching in an 1176 in parallel with, I don't know if it was the kick or the snare, but just showing me some things when we were on a tracking date in A, and I was like, oh man. So yeah.
Now, do you feel like there was as many iterations of parallel treatment back then, or just a few ones? And do you feel like now that everybody's learning how to do this stuff and mixing in Pro Tools in a computer, that we're paralleling the crap out of things all the time?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot more parallel buses going on for sure now than I used to, because it's easier. I'm like, well, shoot, I like some parallel. I like to do some cool parallel stuff on vocals often. Sometimes one's heavily smashed. Sometimes one has this high pass polarity flipped thing going on to pop out some air, that's also heavily compressed after the fact. And my bass channel has this parallel processing, just in my template. It's there ready to go. I don't always use it, but it's there ready to go to bring out, some of the mids, and maybe I distort that one more or whatever,
That's cool. We'll dig into those. We'll really dig into your mix template in the second half of the show here. So that's cool to hear. And I like what you just said about flipping the phase on stuff. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Okay, so Peter Collins, David Leonard, Don Was, and T-Bone Burnett, or Tony Brown. I think of those guys as maybe having very different. Well, it's just all the guys. They've all got probably different styles of doing stuff.
Yeah.
What about T-Bone Burnett? And Don Was? Any memories of working with those guys?
Man, yeah. Don, I worked with Don on a couple of projects, and Ed Cherney was his engineer, and they had done all those Bonnie Raitt records together. And of course, Don had done the B-52s and Was Not Was, obviously.
Right. And the Rolling Stones. I think he oversaw their record at that time, too.
I think you're right. I had forgotten about that. But Don, he was one of those guys, he was so easy to work with. You're like, here's this iconic producer, and he knew how to make a record. And so I worked on this. The one record that I really loved, especially, that was an amazing experience for me, was a record for Jonelle Mosser, who you can still see her in town. She's great, really great, soulful, bluesy voice. Unfortunately, this record that we worked on never came out, but it was Don producing, Ed Cherney engineering, and I got to assist, of course. It was Jim Keltner on drums, if people don't know who he is. Michael Rhodes on bass, Bob and Tom Britt on guitars, and I can't remember if there were any other session players. Probably somebody on keys, I would imagine, but I can't quite remember. But just this amazing group of musicians with some killer songs, and everything seemed easy. I just remember we'd do a take, and Don would be like, "Oh man, that's great." We'd just kind of be laughing and chilling, and it was easy.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where everything just seemed to come together naturally and organically. There was no fighting to make things happen. There was no, having to like, what about this or what about that? I mean, a little bit of that, but it was just such a fun record to be a part of because it was just great people in a room together. And Ed, the sounds he got, I mean, man, how inspiring to play to some of the most amazing sounds in your cans, right? I mean, he made it easy for the musicians because the sounds were just dialed in.
And that was Ed Cherney?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, unfortunately just passed away, I guess within the past year, I think it was.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, one of the greats. And he's another Chicago guy. So he knew my uncle. When he met me, he knew the last name Frigo. My uncle Johnny was a renowned jazz session player in Chicago. He played upright bass and then became actually pretty famous for playing jazz violin in his later life, like even into his 70s. Yeah, he'd been on like the Tonight Show when Johnny Carson was there a handful of times and stuff. So we got to talk about Chicago and my uncle and some of the. And my uncle, he wrote he co-wrote like the Blackhawks theme and the Cubs theme. So he was pretty iconic in the Chicago area.
So you grew up around, this, creating music and stuff like that. It was
a little bit. This was my great uncle, Johnny. But he, I didn't see him all that often, Okay. And then his son actually was named Derek Frigo. Derek has since passed away as well. But Derek was the guitar player in a band called Enough's Enough, which was kind of an 80s glam band. And they had a couple hits. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so, and Derek was really, really renowned. I mean, he was sort of this sought after guy. And I think he was locked into a contract with one band when he was offered something bigger and he couldn't take it, so he was pretty revered for his playing as well. So there is a little bit to the Frigo name in music, I guess, especially in the Chicago area. But
there is now.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway,
what about you? I mean, were you playing instruments and playing music? It sounds like you really kind of came into this from a music appreciator. I mean, unless you didn't talk about.
No, I mean, no, you're right. I didn't really ever become adept at playing an instrument. I loved music and I loved being around it. And my friends were all playing, and I always kind of threatened to I should learn to play guitar, and I never really did. But when we got to Nashville, I started to play around a little bit with guitar and some with keyboards, but I would always set it down for too long and just never get back to it. I don't know why. I was always sucked into this. For some reason, I had it set in my head very early on that I wanted to become a great mixer. And now most of my work, I don't know, probably 90% of my work is mixing, and then still some tracking and producing as well. But I don't know if it's 90, but it's a really high percentage of my work is simply mixing for stuff that I've never heard before I get the tracks, or hear the rough mix.
Cool, man. Well, I'm excited to talk more about mixing. During the height of record making, the Spectre 1964 100 series preamp was the perfect choice to build consoles for Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, Stax Studios, Ardent Studios, and New York City Record Plant, bringing you the sound of ZZ Top, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, King Crimson, John Lennon, and many more. The 100 series amplifiers offer extremely stable, high-speed circuit design with unequaled headroom, low noise, and linear output, irrespective of transient audio peaks, giving you cleaner, punchier, dynamic recordings. The Spectre 1964 legacy is carried on today through Bill Cheney and Jim Romney. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio with the STX Mic Breeze, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectre1964.com or call 801-797-0642. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ BB29 microphone, the Spectre 1964 STX 100, and C610 comp limiter. A gold bar should be kept safe in a vault because it's valuable, but it could be replaced if it was ever lost. One of your songs or recordings, on the other hand, is worth more than gold because it's one of a kind. It's you, and if it was ever lost, it could never be replaced. So wouldn't you feel better knowing your music was safe? This is why I like to have a dedicated system drive, audio work drive, virtual instrument storage drive, cloud storage, and an extra large backup drive in my studio computer. And when I'm finished with the project, I move it onto a dedicated pair pair of external drives for archiving. Thanks to OWC, I can count on my drives being super fast, reliable, and secure so that I can work quickly and sleep soundly at night knowing my music is safe. I want your music to be safe too. Discover the best options for storage and backup for your studio from OWC at macsales.com/rockstars. Have you ever wished you could remove the click-track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with the set-it-and-forget-it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars in the show notes and use the code ROCK10 to get an additional 10% off your first purchase. Hey, Rockstars, we're back. My guest today is Marc Frigo, and we're talking about making records. We're talking about times we were both at Woodland Studios in East Nashville, Tennessee. One of the things we were talking about, Marc, of course, was the Emmylou Harris, Daniel Lanois session. And recently, as I was cleaning out my basement, finally, like getting rid of old console manuals from recording school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I found my old copy of War and Peace. So I had this big, thick hardback book of War and Peace, which I never made it through that. I tried to read it only because people said, you can't read, you'll never make it through War and Peace, which I didn't. But I guess I had it with me at the studio when I was interning one day, and I was in Studio B, and I was back there mixing my school project. And Daniel Lanois sort of like wanders in to come check out the studio. He was like, "Hey, cool, what are you working on?" And I was like, it's my school project, just mixing it, And then he's listened for a second. I don't remember if he commented on it, but then I was like, "Hey, what was that cool guitar tuning you were doing?" Because he had some unusual guitar tuning, and he was like, "Oh, let me write it down for you." And he wrote it down on a piece of console tape, and I stuck it inside that book, and I had lost it for 30 years until I just found it.
That's crazy.
Just before we did this interview. So that was like really a trip to go back and see that. Now, of course, I need to take a photo of that and include that in the show notes so that everybody can know what it was. But it's very unusual tuning.
Cool.
Any other anecdotes you remember about, I know you didn't work on that session, but what were some of the sessions for you that really stood out? Like favorite, like records where you're like, that was one of my favorite records?
The Indigo Girls stuff is always a standout for me. Those were because those were records that we spent a lot of time on, right? And so we ended up being kind of like family because we come into the studio, we'd work. Like Swampophilia was the first album that I worked with them on, and then we'd take a break for dinner. A lot of times it would just be catered. Something would be brought in, or maybe we'd go out to dinner, and then after the session, sometimes we'd go hang out together and go see some live music. Like I remember us all going to see Jill Solbuhl somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Right? I remember like somewhere right across the street from 12th and Porter, there was some room there for a while. At least I think. Maybe I could have my place.
There might have been. But 12th and Porter was a great place to go see music.
12th and Porter was a really wonderful. So I remember doing that. And then also, like on the next records that I worked with them on, Shaming of the Sun, we worked some here in Nashville, but then we went to Austin for 5 weeks and worked there. And so really, because now none of us are home with family, right? We're all, there was this Bennigan's next to the hotel. Sometimes we just go to this Bennigan's and have drinks after the session and sit there and talk about philosophy and whatever. Or go see live music, the Continental clubs down there, where Stevie Ray used to play. So we'd go see some music there, or, I got a friend playing, or we'd be sitting in a restaurant and Ani DeFranco comes in and they know Ani DeFranco, and so she comes up and has dinner with her and her band, And so so those are very memorable for me a lot, not only because the records are cool and the music was cool and it was fun, they were fun projects to be a part of, but because of the camaraderie and just the sense of family that you get with working together for such a long period. That, and then there was, like I said, the Jonelle Mosser record, which unfortunately never came out. That was an amazing record to be a part of. The Gillian Welch album, that Revival.
Interesting.
That T-Bone Burnett produced, that Jay Joyce was on some of that project, and then
that's got to be the reason why they wanted to become the future owners of Woodland, was from
I assume so. I'd run into them a few years ago outside Americana Fest and just kind of caught up. I hadn't seen them in years, I think since we had worked together, and I'm like, wait, Dave? And I'm like, it's Marc Frigo he's like, Mark, wait. So we talked about it a bit, and they had wanted to save the studio. They didn't say specifically because because of the fact that they'd worked there, but obviously,
right.
They had a connection with it, and that made sense to me.
So Rockstars, for clarity, David Rollins and Gillian Welch, they bought Woodland Studios, I guess, from Bob Solomon years later after Bob had. What happened was, I guess we got hit by the 97 tornado, and floods or something caused damage to Woodland. And then didn't Bob move the Woodland studio across the street into the bank for a while?
Yeah, did he ever open it there? I don't even know.
It was more like people were doing, there were people doing private sessions over there and stuff. And
okay. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, Bob never owned the Woodland building. So I think, they just bought the building from whoever, I don't remember who was the owner, but Bob always, had to deal with landlords and stuff and trying to get the roof fixed and whatever, it's always things with the roof on that building because it's a super old building, right?
Yeah.
So I remember that, but.
And so actually to describe the place a little bit more, the chambers, I think were both chambers underneath Studio B? Do you remember the echo chambers? See, you might not have had to go down there, but I would go down with John McGriff because we're the tech guys.
That was around, what's the street, that runs?
You know what? I've never known.
I don't remember the name of the street there, but I think, you'd have to go like behind where the dumpster was, around that side of the building, right?
Yeah.
And then, and you go down there. Yeah, I remember going down there before, but not maybe once or twice. I just really didn't. I don't think we used the chamber. I don't remember using them at all on anything that I worked on. Did you guys have them in use?
I was shown them, and I'm sure we had them working, and I can't remember if I ever used them on anything. I mean, I didn't do that much recording there. I'd be more, exploring and experimenting. But I love that stuff. And, what about, after that, after Woodlands, did you find yourself in studios where you had an opportunity to use chambers, or was using chambers kind of like old hat?
It seemed like it was more old hat. I really didn't use chambers. I don't even remember using like real plates that much after Woodland. And when I was at Woodland, of course I used them. I mean, they were there. I would patch them in, those plates. And they were all, somewhat unique. I think there were 3 plates up there, and they each sounded different, you know?
I think they were all EMTs.
Yeah.
Beautiful plates.
And so, right.
Well, cool. So, we could probably keep going on stories forever, but
for sure.
Here we are in the present day and age, and we talked a little bit about, the way that we used to record and now what you can do in the computer. And of course, I've put together a YouTube playlist of a bunch of records that you've done that sound great, man. Really great sounds, all these mixes you're doing. And it's a real cross-section, a variety of styles, And so I thought we'd jump into that and talk a little bit about your mixing experience. What are you doing? Tell us about your studio now.
So my studio now is just a single building. It's a 16 by 16 building, and it has, I don't know, I guess it's 9, maybe 10-foot ceilings in here. So that's a little bit nice. And it's just nicely treated, set up for mixing specifically. with the acoustic treatment, a pair of subs, and I had Dan Scheich come in and help me tune the room.
Excellent.
6 or 7, I guess almost 7 years ago now. Yeah, whenever we moved back to town and I got set up, I gave him a call and he came in and took a look and said, here's what you need. You need to buy these kind of subs and, get this Meyer EQ if you really want to, just do some real fine tuning. And so. And
you already knew Dan?
Yeah, well, I actually didn't know Dan. I had known of Dan because I know Reed Shippen, and he had been Reed's assistant for a while, and I knew of him through there. And I guess we'd become Facebook friends, and we'd started having a conversation. And I had found out that he had tuned Shane Wilson's room. And I'm like,
cool.
I didn't know that Dan does tuning. I'm like, if it's good enough for Shane, Shane's another guy that we came up together at that same time. And Reed was kind of coming up at that time, maybe a little. He came in a little bit after us.
Yeah.
I remember.
Do you know that Reed was my classmate?
I didn't know that Reed was your classmate.
Yeah, we were classmaets. Yep.
Oh, cool.
Right,
I remember
when I was interning.
That's cool, man. Yeah, I remember meeting Reed at Blockbuster when he was still at MTSU. He was renting movies, and I think I had an Ampex shirt on, and so we started talking, and that was our first meeting. And the next thing I know, I'm over at October one day where I was working with Rick Will on something, and I went over there to see Rick, and Reed's assisting him. And that next thing I know, Reed's great. You can't say anything bad about his mixes. That he's one of the greats these days for sure. But so that's cool, man. I had no idea. I was trying to remember what year was he at MTSU. I can't even remember now.
Same time I was there, but about 92 through 94,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I knew I was already at Woodland when I met him, and but I just couldn't remember about the time he kind of came out and started working with Rick.
Cool.
But
man.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, let's dig into some of the mixing stuff. So you've got you got a beautiful sounding room, stereo subs. That's something I've learned is important. I don't have them yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And then you're mixing. You using Pro Tools, or are you using a hybrid system? Do you like to just mix in the box? What are your
I'm all in the box now. I keep toying with the idea of going hybrid, but at first, it was so hard to mix in the box. Making that transition, I think 2003 is when I ended up trying to mix completely in the box. And it was very difficult. It's become much easier. The plugins have become much better. Pro Tools has gotten much better. Some of the newer routing, the new folder tracks is great. So yeah, I'm in Pro Tools and I've got one mix template that, has a lot of extra stuff in it, just so that I pull it up, import the stuff into it, and delete whatever I don't need and get rocking,
Well, let me preface this by saying, Rockstars, again, go listen to the songs that Marc's mixing, because you'll hear a real consistency across all these different genres and styles. And they all, there's nothing weak. You know what I mean? Everything's right there, right in your face, sounds great. I definitely picked up on the fact that you have a strong skills in getting the vocals to sound great too. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that.
Yeah.
And then, I know what I wanted to say. Who cares if you're not mixing hybrid? When I was listening to your mixes, I actually thought, I wonder if he's mixing hybrid, because this really has a quality to it that sounds like that.
Yeah, see, I love that, and that's the thing. And it's a lot of it is maybe it's because I don't want to say copious amounts of saturation sometimes, but I'll saturate this a little here, and then, this bus is getting a little bit of saturation too. And I don't know, man, that's just, it's been kind of a lifesaver for me, there's no magic bullet, but saturation used tastefully can go a long way to just help give us a more organic sound in the digital world,
Yeah. Well, maybe we should continue on that thread for a second. What is saturation? What does it mean to use saturation in a mix?
Well, saturation is basically creating some kind of harmonic distortion. It's done naturally through analog gear. It just happens naturally. You almost can't get rid of it.
Yeah, you didn't know it was happening when we were recording on analog.
And that's one of the things in the early world of digital. They didn't have any of that built in. So you'd be turning a knob on an EQ and you'd be like, yeah, you hear it doing its thing, but something's missing and you couldn't figure out what it was. And it's that natural harmonic distortion, things saturating, things hitting the electronics in a way that maybe it's not handling perfectly, but it's cool. We like that. Or the way it's hitting the tape. Tape saturates. There's only so much signal it can handle before it wants to try to square off the wave, but it can't really square it off on the tape. It's doing it in this more natural, organic way. So there's this compression happening, this natural tape compression and saturation that's happening there. And sometimes you would specifically hit the tape, like the Queen albums for sure. All those Queen records were recorded really, really hot, that the machines were calibrated in such a way that they were making sure they were taking advantage of that tape saturation and tape compression to add something nice, a nice quality to the recordings right from the get-go.
And it's interesting because if you get a hold of the Queen multitracks and you listen to them, well, two things. One is the first question you always have to ask if you get that is like, did they do a good job of transferring this? Am I listening to a good version of this multitrack?
Right.
But two is if you say, okay, maybe I am, then I think I was immediately struck by just how dark and like pillowy all those tracks sound too.
Interesting. Yeah.
Things aren't super bright or whatever. And
yeah. And so you're thinking, well, how much of that was done in the mix, and what did they do in the mix to make, to get it that way?
Right.
Those are all my questions anyway that I start to think. Because a lot of tracks I get tracks. Probably some of the stuff in my playlist, some of those tracks are probably pretty subpar that I get these days. Not everything I get sounds amazing when you get it. It's really nice when you get stuff that's tracked well and you push the faders up and you go, dang, this is really good.
Yeah. PreSonus has everything you need for your music or podcast production. Studio One is a great choice for your DAW, whether you are writing songs, creating EDM and pop music, recording bands, mixing, mastering, composing for film, or recording voice and producing a podcast of your own. A flexible sketchpad, chord charts, key recognition, effects pedals, amp simulators, virtual instruments including a killer drum machine, built-in vocal tuning with Melodyne, and 37 fantastic sounding plugins for mixing will allow you to create whatever inspires you. PreSonus provides you everything you need for your studio, from microphone to digital interface to headphones and speakers, so that you can easily set up your home studio for professional production. Get started now with the low-cost Studio One Artist and join PreSonus Sphere for access to all their software, a complete learning library, and creative collaboration in the community at PreSonus, wherever sound takes you. If your goal was to climb Mount Everest, you would hire a Sherpa to guide you to the summit. If you wanted to sail around the world, you would hire a seasoned sea captain for a safe voyage. And if you wanted to try skydiving, you wouldn't just jump out of an airplane without being strapped to an expert, right? So why would you send off your mix for mastering without knowing that it was ready first? Wouldn't it be great to have a professional mastering engineer with a trained ear to guide you through the final stages of mixing? Brian Murphy is your trusted guide at soundporter.com. Home of the iterative mastering process, where you get to interact with a professional mastering engineer who listens to what you want and will give you mix feedback to help you get your mix ready for mastering. Contact Brian now for a free mix review and mastering demo so that you can hear it before you buy it at soundporter.com. Okay, cool. So then saturation, again, it's like distortion, it's harmonic distortion that makes things sound more interesting. What are, like, if I was to just say, hey, name 3 to 5 plugins that do saturation that are kind of interesting ones to try in different ways.
Yeah, I really like the isotope stuff. Neutron 3, it has the exciter module in it, which is basically a saturator. So it has, I think it's 3 or 4 bands of saturation. 3 bands? I can't remember.
Okay, cool.
But that's been one of my go-tos. Neutron 3, I use it a lot like a channel strip, and it's my starting point for a lot of things these days. And it's mainly the EQ in there. There's a thing called Sculptor that I play with sometimes, but the EQ and the saturator, and sometimes the transient shaper comes into play for me in Neutron 3. Those are the main things. I don't often use the compression in there. I tend to like maybe pop an 1176 or a distressor or an LA2A or a Fairchild or something that has a specific sound or flavor, that I'm looking for in compression. And I'll just play with that. I'll try different ones. But
and that might go right on the track itself, or is this a parallel?
No, this is usually right on the track. This is usually going to go right on the track. And you can, but the beauty about it is that it can be in parallel because I can adjust the mix knob on each module in Neutron. So like if I don't want that much saturation, I can turn mix down for one band or globally, or, so I have there's a lot of control over it, which I like. But then, Sound Toys, the whole suite is great, but Decapitator, right, is an amazing saturation. Devil Lock has this kind of distortion saturation thing going. What else? They probably have some others that do. Radiator is another one in the Sound Toys bundle. Is kind of a saturator, I guess. Maybe it's supposed to be more like a transformer, but there's some saturation going on there as well.
Yeah, no, there definitely is, I think, in that one. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and they all do it in a little different way. Decapitator can be brutal. You could do some really drastic stuff, or you could be real subtle, just depending on how you use it. But it's really flexible too. So I just love those types of plugins.
Do you find that when you're mixing, more often than not, if something's in parallel, then you're more likely to go brutal with it and just tuck it in? And if something's on the track itself, you're more likely to be much more subtle about how much distortion you're adding? Is that an accurate
I tend to agree with that, because then I've got it on this other fader. I can make it nuts and then just pull the fader back, or whatever. Yeah. So absolutely. Generally speaking.
Cool. And then you quickly mentioned, you talked about plugins or compressors like 1176 LA2A. Are you a UAD guy? And are those the ones you reach for? Or
I'm not. No, I haven't. The only reason is I'm like, man, I'm already into Pro Tools, right? And there's already this thing there that I've got hanging over me every year or whatever for fees.
Just where you're going to spend.
I've got a few of the waves, and then I get hit with the update plan there, and I'm like, man, do I want to jump on board with UAD? Part of me says yes, and another part of me says, man, just you're doing okay. You got everything you need. I haven't felt the need to go there.
Right.
So some of it
your mixes sound great already. So
thank you. Yeah. And that's the bottom line, right? Whatever I use doesn't mean that, you have to emulate it. If you like my mixes, maybe some of what I do is worth giving a shot. But even at the same time, there are engineers who do things that I love and engineers that I love, and I'm trying the things that they do, and I just can't get them to work for me. So I do what I do. Yeah.
I think as musicians feel the same way. You watch another musician play something, and you go try it, and you're like, man, I just can't do that thing. I love what you're doing, but I can't do that thing. I got to do my thing,
Yeah, it doesn't. For whatever reason, it never comes out for me the way it comes out, or at least in my perception is it doesn't, and it's not working when I do it. So anyway.
Well, I guess another analogy there is you hear stories about people picking up like Eddie Van Halen's guitar, and he gets that sound, and then somebody else picks it up and plays it, and it sounds like shit. It's because it's Eddie playing that sound that sounds that way. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Any musician, that they're going to have their preference of the gear they use, but the bottom line is, you have to have a great player, and that player has to have at least something that's adequate for them. To use. And same thing goes with, engineering and the gear you're using. I remember some of the older, cheaper, low-end consoles when you try to turn, I want to add some high end. It just sounds like tin.
Right.
I remember that. And then I remember when the Mackeys came out, to me, that was this huge breakthrough in bang for your buck, and thinking, oh my goodness, this high end EQ is actually usable, on a board in this price point, which I'd never heard before.
Yeah. So that sort of spins us back to tying a few of the stories together. Jill Sobule.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were assisting those guys, Roger Moutino, over in Studio B when he was mixing Jill Sobule.
I was not. I don't know. Maybe that was Sandy.
Maybe it was.
Sandy,
yeah.
I think, worked with Roger a good bit. Anyway, I don't know.
Well, so those guys were doing that record, and I was interning, and I kept hearing this weird, unusual music coming out of the open door to the studio.
Yeah.
Because you'd be mixing in B, but the door to the control room was open, and then that would carry across the big room, and then the door to the lounge was open, and so you could hear what was going on,
Yep.
Which was cool, and that really struck me. And then I'd meet Robin Eaton and Brad Jones when they'd come out, and Roger Moutino, they'd come out into the lobby, and I'd get them a coffee and talk with them for a sec.
Yeah.
And so then after I left Woodland, after that was over, and the reason I left was actually because I did get hired to do tech stuff. And then Bob sat me down one day and he was like, listen, we want to start a new thing. We want you to come in at midnight and fix stuff till 8 a.m. in between sessions. And and I was like, I remember thinking like, oh, hell no, I don't want to do that shit.
Right.
I want to make records. Of course, and it's a funny, like, it's one of those fork in the roads in your life where you're like, if I'd gone this way, what would have happened? If I went this way, what would have happened? And there's kind of no wrong choice, like I went away and everything, lots of cool things happened. But I hear you tell the stories about like, you weren't even assisting for a long time. You were fixing the drywall and cleaning the bathrooms and doing other things. And, I don't know that anybody sort of mentored me to say, hey, dude, you got to go fix shit for a while. And next thing you know, you might be making a record.
Yeah.
But anyway, to try and make it quick. So I left there, went and delivered pizzas, wrecked my car delivering pizzas, was feeling a little, down in the dumps on the couch. And I was like, I got to get out there and, find myself a job. Went to the record store. The new Jill Sobule record was out. And I flipped it over and I went home and listened to it. And I was like, oh my God, I love it. This is super cool. I can totally get with this music and the style. And I flipped it over and I found out about Alex the Great. And I called the studio and, randomly Brad Jones picks up the phone of the studio and I, got an inside and then went over and met him and stuff. So I started working over there. And what was my point of my story? My point was that they did they had ADATs, and that's how they were able to start, affordably start a multi-track recording studio at that time.
Yeah. And
their console was a 32-channel Mackie. So if it wasn't for the ADATs and the Mackie, I don't know I don't know if I would have found a studio that was doing the kind of records that I was digging. Yeah. That I could have gotten a gig at. So.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I ended up working a good bit like after Woodland, and this is during a time that the whole industry is changing at the end of the 90s, right? And so as I'm coming into my own, stepping into the first engineer position, this is right as the labels are slowing down and they're not signing as many acts. And I'm like, the timing couldn't be worse for me. I'm like trying to move out of the assistant engineer position. And so I ended up doing a bunch of publishing demos at my friend Stephen McClintock. Do you know Stephen at all? With Tim James?
No.
But anyway, Stephen and Tim and Matthew and Gunnar Nelson used to stay at their place. They had a place in West Mead, and they were really close. Or at least Stephen was very close with Matthew and Gunnar of the band Nelson. Ricky Nelson's kids.
Right.
And so anyway. I'd somehow met Steven. I think I was cold calling, and I found their publishing company and I'm like, I need some work, man. What am I going to do here? Everything's changing. I don't know. So I found them and I went in and they had the Mackie, a 32-channel Mackie. And at the time, I think it was a 1-inch 16-track analog machine, which was a bit of a beast. It was really hard
Maybe
to punch
the
on.
Tascam or something.
I can't quite remember, but I think that probably was a Tascam, but it was really hard to punch on. The anticipation was like, it was really rough to figure out and to make like smooth punches. But quickly we had changed over to ADAT. And so, working on that board and with, it was a lot of publishing demos. We were cutting like 5 or 6 songs in a 3-hour session, but we had these amazing players and adequate gear. And that's when I realized, that's when I came to had this epiphany that, oh my goodness, the gear, you've got to have some decent gear, but you don't have to have the most amazing gear. It's way more important to have the most amazing people on your dates, because we were making borderline record quality stuff, just churning it out. A day and a half, we'd have 5 or 6 songs done, mixed, overdone, everything complete, and you'd be going, this is a little more finesse, and we'd have a full-fledged album sounding track here. And it was just because of the system we had. It was that assembly line system where, it's this keyboard player, I know that keyboard sound in that patch. I could almost dial in the EQ before he even plugged in because I just knew, right?
That's great, yeah.
And so anyway,
having
sort of
great
an aside,
musicians,
but just the gear, great musicians.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to agree with you that like that process for you of going and getting into, I imagine Woodland was a little bit more, let's take some time on some things here and there. Be quick, but we'll work on something. And then you go into this demo situation, which I really appreciate that about Nashville, that work mentality is like, let's crank this stuff out, crank it out. Because I think you learn incredible skill sets when you finally put yourself through that kind of ringer,
For sure. It was highly valuable. I met Tom Bukovac there too, who's pretty renowned guitarist. He used to work there at Stephen's Place on almost all those dates. So, but yeah, some good times.
Yeah, we need to get Tom on the podcast. I'm trying to reach him, so I may have to
oh yeah, man.
Get a shout out through you.
Great guy.
Yeah, would you say that time in the demo studio probably accelerated your mixing and really like kicked off mixing for you?
Man, for sure, because up until that point, I'd probably done a lot more tracking and overdubs and mixing a minimal amount of it, but doing these publishing demos, you had to be on point. You had to dial in sounds both on the tracking side and the mixing side very, very quickly. So, oh man, such a huge appreciation for my time there and mixing it. We didn't have perfect rooms to mix in. The room wasn't tuned. I had a pair of NS10s and that was it. There was no sub. And I remember finding a spot in the room that I could stand in where I'm like, the low end's about as close to right here as it's going to be. So I would always go stand in this spot in the room to check the low end.
Now, how would you know that it was right? Do you feel like you had a sense of what sounded good because you'd been at a studio where the monitoring was maybe better? Or do you feel like it's just an accumulated sense of what sounds good?
I think it's sort of all of the above. I mean, just learning that room and hearing the mixes that I was putting out of there earlier on, and then kind of knowing where the deficiencies were, and then maybe putting those mixes back up in there, and then A being those and A being other mixes that I really liked, and listening around the room to find where they sounded right to me. So it's just this combination of things, which fortunately I don't have to do anymore. I sit in the mixed position in my room and I'm not second guessing anything. I'm like,
that's great, man.
This is what it sounds like,
That's great. But it's so it's a combination, a lot of comparisons, a lot of comparing and contrasting helps.
Yeah. And obviously I still do that, right? I mean, I'm still pulling up references. Like every time I mix a song for someone, I'm asking them, what do you want this to sound like? Do you have a vision? Are there artists and songs that have the sound and vibe and feel that you're going for?
Yeah.
And so
I find that really valuable. Asking the artist, like, what are you going for?
Yeah. And if they don't, maybe they're just like, man, I just want to hear what you're going to do. And I'm like, okay. And then sometimes as I'm mixing, a reference comes to mind, I'm like, oh man, I think I should pull up, an old Roxy music album. I don't know what, whatever to reference for this.
The secret to a great mix is to start with great source tracks, and this means you need great microphones. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia brings you the new BB29 Signature Series microphone to help your recordings add clarity and detail to your mixes. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design with a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity without distracting colorations and distortions. The new BB29 microphone has a Class A discrete amplifier circuit, extremely low self-noise, and transformer-coupled output to bring an expensive sound to your studio for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, you can use the coupon code ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the BB29 at jzmic.com. The legendary API sound can be described as punchy and bold with a distinct in-your-face presence. For more than 50 years, API Audio has been advancing their design of consoles, mic preamps, compressors, and EQs, but what API founder Saul Walker got perfect in the very beginning were the proprietary op-amp and transformer designs. And today, API still offers the very best for your studio with dedicated rack units for mic pre, EQ, and compression, and consoles from small to large with the Box 1608, 2448, or full-size Legacy Access, and they even introduced the original 500 series lunchbox to studios everywhere. But most importantly of all, no matter which gear you choose from API, you can count on the original op-amps and transformer designs to make sure you always get that legendary API sound. Because the next record you make could be your best record ever. Visit apiaudio.com. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins and PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. Well, cool. All right. Well, so let's keep digging into your mixing setup. So now you're mixing in the box.
Yeah.
What you're bringing a mix. What are some things that go into a mixing template for you? Just like how would you generally describe what your mixing template looks like?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I have like full tracks ready to go to drag the drums onto. Like a kick, a snare. I don't think I have a bottom snare in like an out kick mic. I can just duplicate if I need to,
right.
If I need more than one.
Just duplicate it so you can delete it 5 minutes later.
Sometimes, right? Yeah. Yeah. Like I have 3 hi-hat. No, just kidding. But yeah, I mean, like I've got kick, snare, hat, a few tom tracks, stereo overhead, stereo room. And then I think that's basically it for drums, but then they'll have some plugins set up and ready to go, like some gates that I may or may not use. Usually Isotope Neutron is going to be on there. They're set up and ready to go to my parallel drum bus. I've got a feed off the kick that's ready to go to if I want a side chain compression on the bass. That's set up and ready to go on a bus. And then it goes through. Now I'm using folder tracks, right, as my subgroups. So it goes through there, which has, I think I've got a Fairchild compressor on there and an instance of Decapitator on there.
Okay.
So and which may or may not get used. All these plugins, they're turned off. I mean, nothing's. I don't have any like here's my preset EQ for kick. I got maybe sort of I do because I've got some samples ready to go. And sometimes I'm like, well, if it's this sample, probably this is what I'm going to be looking for out of it. So I have sort of a preset EQ curve, but it changes, obviously from song to song. And it's not always going to be this particular sample that I like. So that's set up. And then I've got the same kind of thing with bass. I've got a bass bus set up, and I've got a stereo bass track with a parallel processing channel and a mono bass track with a parallel processing channel, and that goes through a folder tracks setup that is my subgroup. I don't think I have any processing on the subgroup, but I can throw something on there if I want it. And
with folder tracks now, I believe we got two different kinds. We got one where the audio doesn't route through it, and then we got one where the audio does route through it, which kind of makes it the same thing as an AUX.
Yeah, I'm only using so far the routing tracks, because I'm like, well, most of the time I'm going to want to route it through something just in case it's there. Oh, if I want to do something on this as a bus, as a group, I can. I don't always, but it's there. So yeah, that's how I'm using it.
And do you actually collapse the folder so that your mix might look really tidy on the screen?
Sometimes I do, yeah. At some point, earlier on, most things are all opened up, and as I'm just kind of getting things together, But then, like on my bass tracks, I've got like a ridiculous amount of plugins on there because with bass, I never know what I'm going to use. There's going to be, a lot of times it's a distressor plugin. It's just such a versatile compressor that I find I can make that work usually, and it works really well. It can sound like a lot of different other compressors.
Are you using the Arouser?
I'm not. I'm using the Slate one right now because I have that Slate bundle. So I've just been using it. I've been thinking about getting the Arouser, but I haven't since I've got the Slate one, and it's been working well.
Well, I think it's a good takeaway though, just with that topic of like, which plugin should I get? I do think that like most of the time, if we've got a version of something, that probably is going to do what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can go back and A/B and compare, but it all really depends on what else am I doing to this too. Exactly. It's not just the compression. It's actually a relatively small part of it, and then I've got probably an instance of Neutron. I think, like just the old lo-fi plugins. Sometimes I just like to distort.
Oh, man, I haven't been using the lo-fi.
The stupid old lo-fi, right? Simple thing that's been there since I've had Pro Tools. I think I started on Pro Tools 5, and it's been there since Pro Tools 5, right?
Can I share? I keep resharing this one because I love this one. This comes from one of our guests, Chris James. It was one of his tricks with lo-fi. He said, put lo-fi on anything, even the stereo bus, and I think you do 1% distortion, and then that's it. And he said it's like a magic thing.
I've done that. Yeah, like 1% distortion or 1% saturation, because a little goes a long way with that one, and it's, I wish maybe they had like an output knob so you could level match, which you can't with that one, but it's still, I don't know, on bass, sometimes it just works. And then I've got a few different things, like I'll have Submarine on there. I'll have BX Subsynth, BX Subfilter, Low Air, Max Air, R Bass. And sometimes I use none of those, but they're all there so that I can A/B quickly,
Right.
And like in an LFO and some various things. And then, the compression that gets side chained, if I want to use that, that's ready to go there. And then on my parallel bus, it's just kind of this filtered, more distorted kind of thing. And sometimes I throw BX Stereo Maker on there and go, well, let's make the distortion a little wider and give it some width. I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't.
That's cool.
But sometimes I like to widen that bass just a little bit to pull it, to give it more width and depth in the mix.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. I actually remember hearing Jakir King talk about that at a
cool
event once. He talked about widening the bass slightly, and now I tried a bunch, and I usually just don't know if I like it or not.
I'm in good company.
But I like trying stuff. I always say that on Recording Studio Rockstars. The most important thing is you get excited to go try something.
Yeah, man. And sometimes you're just like, it's garbage. Or sometimes, it worked great on that last one. I'm going to try it again. And you're like, well, it doesn't sound anything like it did on that. It sounds terrible now. It sounds better to me. And it's one of those that you have to learn to use. Have you tried Gullfoss?
No, not yet.
Use that? Yeah. So I saw it, I think, at some point on, I think I was watching Pensado's place one day and I saw it. I'm like, I'm going to download the demo. I'm like, dang, this is really cool, but it takes a lot of getting used to figure out what's it doing. But almost always I have it on there, it ends up on there. And then I have an instance of Ozone, and it's got a bunch of modules in it, and I can use the compression, the saturation. It has multi-band dynamics if you want a little bit of that on there. Sometimes it's on there, sometimes not. What else? I can't remember what else is in Ozone in my. But the modules may or may not get used.
Mm-hmm. So start with the bypassed and then bring them in as you need. Kind of thing.
Bypass it, and usually the first thing I want a little bit of compression, so I try that, and if the compressor in there works and gives me the kind of little pump and energy that I'm looking for out of it, to keep that movement that you want in a mix, keep the kick drum moving and whatever. I like to use the bus compression for that, and usually it's fairly light. I'm usually not like, let's get nuts with bus compression on the mix bus. I just, that's where I am right now. That could change next week. Everything that I do is open to change. What I'm doing this week or this year may not be what I do next year, because it's very different than what I did 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. It just changes.
Yeah. Well,
it just warps.
Bus compression is one of those funny things I've seen and learned from people, where they're moving the needle more than I normally would have. And I'm like, man, but that sounds great when you do it like that. And then I also remember mixing a record that I was producing, and we had mixed it with Tom Lord Alge down at his studio. And he was mixing through the Red, the Focusrite Red series, and that bus needle just almost never even moved. And I was like, oh, that's the secret. You never move the bus needle,
Yeah.
But, like you said, there's probably so many other things at play too.
Yeah. And I mean, and there are times when I'm like, I get a lot heavier. It's just my norm is I don't heavily compress the mix bus these days. It really just depends on what the music calls for. But most times, whatever it is, combined with other things that I'm doing, I don't feel the need to squash the mix bus that much. It usually ends up doing more harm than good with whatever else I'm doing in the mix.
Interesting.
For whatever reason,
Yeah, just the way your mix adds up.
Yeah.
It doesn't need
exactly.
it there. Okay, let's rewind for a second and throw in the topic of tape. So you're familiar with tape and what it does in old school and analog. Mm-hmm. How often and where do you find it's useful to bring tape into your mix template?
For me, it's usually going to be on the mix bus. If I'm going to put some tape emulation, it's probably going to be right on the mix bus. It's not always. I mean, I know I've put it like on a drum bus before.
But like, do you ever find it's useful to put a tape right on the kick track and a tape right on the snare track just to make them sound like tape?
I don't know that I've messed with it that much. I've never felt the need to go there, but maybe I should try it.
Again, we hang up, dude, I'm going to go try that out.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a mix. Maybe when I pull that back up after we get off of here, I'll
there's times where I've cut drums to tape and I'm working on it. I'm like, I just love the way that kick and snare sounds,
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a give and take. There's some things that digital does really well that tape doesn't, and vice versa, and so trying to take advantage of the best of both worlds can be really cool. And with the emulation now, you can do a lot of that just in the box. All right.
I got 2 questions for you. We'll jump into specifics.
Right on.
The drums, so first of all, you're doing a template. You start out with an empty template and then you drag and drop the tracks onto it. Is that how it works? Or is it more like the template's there, they're all imported, and then you just pull the track down onto the other one and just delete the empty track kind of thing?
It can work. Yeah, it can work either way. Usually what I do is I open up the template, I find out that what's the bit and sample rate of the tracks, and then I set up the template, and usually it's going to be 32-bit no matter what the bit rate is. But so I open up a template and I save it as that, and then I just pull in the audio from the whatever audio files they've sent me. I just pull that in, I sort the tracks out, and I may just drag and drop them onto the other tracks, or sometimes I just drag the plugins from the other. It really just depends on how close it matches my template, because sometimes it's like way far, like these tracks aren't even close to the same thing. So most of what I've got on my template isn't really. So sometimes it's just dragging the plugins over to the existing track that I imported, or sometimes it's dragging the imported track over to the track in the template for that instrument.
So it's almost like there's no way around it. Starting with your template and getting things organized so that you can begin to mix. It's a slightly messy process that you have to just slog through it a little bit until you've got everything ready to go. And then you're ready, right?
I'm always looking for shortcuts for that, but I'm like, I never seem to find any, like, it's never as fast as I want it to be. But, depending, like if it's 70, 80 tracks, it's going to take a bit of time. If it's 25 tracks, like, whoa, it's just a straight ahead rock record. Cool, man. It can be super quick to get set up and running in the template. But and usually you're sorting through and things are named like, what is this? Is this a keyboard or is it so you're trying to figure that out before you can even get it in the right groove, in the right.
Now, are you using the stereo monoizer plugin? You familiar with that one?
Stereo mono. Yeah, I am. I will use that. Sometimes I forget and I import and I go, oh yeah, shoot. I gotta go stereo monoizer. And sometimes I'll even do some normalizing there because, you get tracks that the levels are all over the place and you're doing a lot of clip gain. Even with the normalizing, I end up doing a little bit of clip gain just to get the tracks, kind of what I think is an optimum level for the plugins,
Well, let me ask you that. So how can we ballpark what sort of optimum levels are? I guess there's an optimum level of the track feeding the plugins on that track itself. Then there's sort of optimum levels for how all these buses are adding up as they head over towards the stereo bus. Any tips you want to share and how to approach that?
My way is, I like that -18 range for the individual tracks. I find that to be pretty good. And that's my starting point is I want them sitting. So like anywhere between that -20 and -15 on the meter. I can't remember how I have my meters set up, but I have them set up
depending on how you choose it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So between -20 and 15 in the way I have my metering set up, and it's right when it kind of gets into that bright green range is where I'm looking for.
We're talking about the VU level or the average level, not the peaks.
Yeah, I would think I'm pretty sure it's RMS. Yeah.
RMS. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm looking for that. But if something's particularly spiky, if it's very percussive, it might be a little lower, because you're like, man, those spikes are right up at like -1 now, even though my RMS. So sometimes those instruments, those hi-hats and things of that nature, shakers or whatever, maybe those are a little lower. So that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And then, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and then like all the drums are adding up and they're exiting a folder track. What are those levels? What do those RMS levels look like as they're headed towards the stereo bus?
I'm a little less concerned there, but what I do, like when I've got things set up right, when it hits the compressor a certain way, when I have the threshold a certain way, that's kind of my clue to like, okay, it's hitting my master bus about where I normally like it, which is going to be much, much hotter than the -18 for me. That's just where I've ended up these days. Like I've heard some people say, no, you want your master bus there too. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I've tried that and I feel like it's better for me when I'm goosing that master bus a little more. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's the master bus plugins can handle it better or I don't know what. And I'm not quite sure what that exact level is. I haven't paid close attention, but like if I've got that, like the threshold of the compressor in ozone set at, I think it's -26 is my default, and I'm starting to see a little compression there, but that's with a really slow attack, so if the attack's faster, it's going to grab quicker, and you're going to need to adjust the threshold. The threshold's going to be higher,
Mm-hmm.
So some people say, oh, that's such a low threshold. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a really slow attack is where I start. And that's going to change as things, it may change. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be still on the slowest attack. But I always like to start I'm generally start with a slow attack and tighten it up if need be, because I like the dynamics to kind of pop,
Yeah. Do you feel like the time you spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen, I appreciate you listening to this podcast, and I know you're trying to make your best record ever. But when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then you're ready for UltimateMixingMasterclass.com. Cool, man. And then, I think conceptually, we're starting with these individual tracks that are down in the -18. And by the time we're done, we're trying to pack the whole mix into this big fat sausage of a final print that sounds like a mastered record. Do you try to mix where, what you're listening to and what you're spitting out is pretty close to matching a mastered sound? Or do you approach it differently?
No, I mean, I want it to sound as finished as possible before any mastering, to the extent that I even have, I put some mastering limiting on the end, at least to hear it, and I'll print a version with that as well for people, I'm like, well, here's my vision of what this would sound like mastered, if you like it, great. If you, if your mastering engineer, doesn't work out, or you like this master better, fine, whatever.
Right.
You can use it or not use it. So
so the idea of printing a couple of mixes, the one with the limiting and one without, that's totally okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys are probably doing that now. At least most of the guys I talk to are, and to me it makes sense because I'm like, well, I want to hear what this sounds like when I hit some limiting that's getting this to would I envision a decent overall loudness level for this particular song or style of music,
Yeah. Got to sound great in the car.
Yeah. So if I turn on a limiter and it's really jacking it up, I'm thinking, well, man, maybe there's something wrong with my mix. And I go back and I try to adjust it, which anymore I don't know that that's happened to me in a long time. When I kick on the limiter, it sounds good to me now. And maybe that's just years of doing this and knowing my technique and what's going to work and what's not, kind of understanding that a little more intuitively than maybe what I used to. I don't know. Yeah. But usually when I kick the mastering on, it's not. There are times like especially with the more urban stuff where there's a ton of low end, that can be hard to make loud and still maintain some of the dynamics and get that kick drum to push through still. So there are times when I have to mess with. That's about the only time, though, I think. And not even always, just every now and then I'm like, oh man, this is screwing up. The kick drum's just not that punch of the kick isn't popping through or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But most times I find that once I get the limiting on, it's still sounding pretty good to me. So
yeah, that was one of my questions: is how is bass and level managed differently across musical styles? Because you're doing this, you're doing hip hop, you're doing rock, you're doing pop, you're doing country, and they all sound appropriate on your, on your demo reel.
Yeah, cool.
Well, not demo reel's the wrong word.
Oh, yeah.
On your portfolio.
Yeah.
But it's cool, and it made me wonder if it's different sets of challenges when you're trying to do sub bass and a hip hop kind of low end and kick versus a country rock thing.
For sure it is, I mean, the more urban stuff that has the big 808 and sub bass sounding stuff, I mean, it's definitely more work down there. I mean, the low end's always, to me, I feel like I spend maybe an inordinate amount of time on the low end. I don't know. It's such an important part of the mix that you really want that to translate well.
Yeah.
And that's why I have my room tuned, and that's a huge, huge help. But even so, like sometimes sub bass, it's just, how do I get this to speak and cut through? Sometimes you're not dealing with a sound that's great to begin with. A lot of times I'm like, I push the fader up. I'm like, okay, pop that onto the NS10s. Oh, it sounds great on the NS10s already. Great. I can hear the presence of this bass, which you need to hear, because you're going to lose that bass on a lot of systems if it has no presence.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you're working to figure out, how do I make that happen? I mean, okay, the low end's there, great. I'm going to hear it. I'm going to hear it in a club. That's wonderful. But I'm not going to hear it on my, my AirPods or whatever, know. So you're trying to figure out, you want to hear it. Obviously, it's not going to have the same impact and the same kind of low end as it is on a system with subs. But
you have to sense it. You have to feel it. You have to know it's part of the musical.
Yeah. And sometimes the sound design in the production stage is already there, and they've done a great job of that. Other times, it's not, and every time this one note plays, it's just getting carried away. So, I got to notch that out or do some dynamic EQ there or whatever to make that sit. And even out to some extent, sometimes it's cool. You don't want it to be quite even. Sometimes that one note should be, whatever. And that's learning the feel of the song and what the song calls for and what is that note doing for the emotion that's trying to be conveyed here. Is it adding to it, or is it just a distraction? Sometimes it's just a distraction. If I keep playing something back and every time that note it's popping out and it's catching my ear in a way that's pulling me out of the mix, then I'm like, all right, well then I need to address that,
Yeah, and I think about, and then there's stylistic stuff too, where it's like old school hip hop. I feel like they didn't pull out that many tricks, it was different. So it's like you just have this big boomy bottom that's way different from modern low end.
Oh yeah, for sure. So again, and that's where, the references are coming in like, hey, what do you like? What do you think this should be in the style of, and so then you're A-Bing, with appropriate tracks that makes sense according to the artist's vision,
Yeah, I kind of feel like old school low end is like upper low end and modern low end is sub low end.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think old school, not as many people had the playback systems. I feel like we've got, even in the studio systems are better now.
And how would you have delivered it back in the day?
Yeah.
On a cassette or a turntable? A turntable would have jumped the needle right out. Right,
exactly. Yeah, so I'm doing things with low end right now that I'm thinking, man, I hope they don't want to cut this to vinyl ever. I'll have to remix this.
That's cool, man. Well, dude, awesome stuff. Let me ask you a closing question here. You have managed to balance, work life and family and stuff like that. Such a cool story about you and Amy, and both, she's like, he's cute. Let's hire him for the studio.
I'm not sure if that's what she was thinking right away, but we can roll with that.
All right, take it, man. So, you managed to, get into a relationship, get married. You're still in the music biz, still making records. You've adapted with the times and sending kids off to college and stuff. So congrats on that. What are some lessons that you've learned about just work-life balance and stuff that seems to be smart?
I mean, I do try to quit by a certain time. Fortunately, we're all a late night family. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure. Sometimes it would be nice if we all got up early, I think. But I try personally, like I want to be done in the studio by 7:30 or 8 at night. And go in, and then we have dinner and hang out, and because we're late night, that works out okay. Like for others, it might be 5 or 6, but for me, that's been a great thing. And taking one day off a week that I have with them, has been important to just not be in the studio one day a week. Sometimes it's a couple days. Sometimes I'll take the whole Saturday, Sunday weekend off. Sometimes it's just one day. But at least one day a week where I get away from the studio, that's huge for me. And it helps keep me fresh too,
Yeah.
So,
and what was I going to say? Oh, and I think you mentioned that your kids are homeschooled. So that sort of, again, like you guys sort of developed a family system that has the flexibility to go with the music.
Yeah, for sure.
Perhaps,
and I mean, they definitely have things that are, homeschool groups that they have to meet with outside the house. Although, the COVID thing put the kibosh on a lot of that.
Right.
So a lot of that shifted to online, whatever they could do. But so, and knowing their schedule, like, okay, Tuesdays, they weren't going to be home normally because of a homeschool music group that they're part of. And I know my daughter's on Fridays has this tutorial and my son on Thursdays has this tutorial. And they each have this music lesson on this day at this time. So just kind of being aware of their schedule and trying to be available around that as much as possible. Obviously, I'm going to put in 40 or 50 hours a week in the studio or whatever. I don't know exactly all the time, but
at 110 decibels steady level.
Man, for sure. Why go any lower? Go big or go home, buddy. No.
All right. Well, shit, man, there's so much cool stuff we could talk about. And it'd be great to talk about listening levels and everything, but we may have to circle back and do a follow-up episode.
Cool, man.
And we might have to even dig in deeper into your mix process. Maybe on the next one, we can just super focus on mixing tips or something like that.
Maybe so. Maybe I can do, like a screenshot of the template or something. I don't know what.
Sure, man.
Since
sure.
then. Yeah.
We love mixing, dude. We love getting into the studio and, mixing classes and master class. We love that stuff. So
yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, dude. One last question here. This one's hypothetical, but we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Okay.
And you're going to go back in time and find young Marc of the Frigo legends of Chicago.
Yeah.
And you say, listen, dude, I know you want to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I'm going to say, be easy to work with. Don't be the guy that's always, countering things or whatever. Be chill, be cool.
Yeah. Are you ready to rock?
Hank.
No, I'm ready to chill, man.
There you go.
Cool, dude. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, man. Let the rock stars know, how can they go check out all your stuff? Where should they go learn more about you and your music? How do they book you for their next great record mix?
Yeah, you can, you can go to www.platinummixer.com, and then my info's there. My phone number's there. My email is there. You can and there's a contact form there. So you could use any one of those methods to get a hold of me. You can check that out. And then, there's samples of my work there as well and some other info. So that's the way to do it.
Okay.
PlatinumMixer.com.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much, man. Thanks for joining us in this strange times. Of course, again, I'm dating this. When you guys listen to this, it will have been many moons ago that we were in quarantine, and hopefully that'll be old news by that time.
Sure, hope so.
I look forward to seeing you in person out on the streets when it's safe again soon.
It's my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Talk
See you
soon,
soon,
dude.
buddy.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Presonus, API Audio, Isotope, Sound Porter Mastering, Jay-Z Microphones, and Spectra 1964. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio, and they're going to help you make your best record ever. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.